is a new slide, green source.
No, that was on there last time.
Huh?
This was there last time.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So all I did was update last month's handful of slides.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is a fast typist.
That's Julie.
I have to be. But sometimes I hit return on chat before I'm through typing.
You all capture your chats and post them up with your videos?
Their chats are captured, but we haven't posted them with the videos. We could do that.
I don't know if people share stuff or not, generally.
Well, if you click that, you can see what people are saying.
Right, but you can also capture it. I mean, it gets captured, and you can, if people, stick in websites and things like that.
Mm.
Right.
Well, I hope the speaker has the Zoom link.
Well, he should have gotten the email by now, if it's a he.
I believe JC is a male.
JAY.
Have y'all talked about when you're going back to in person?
National says that won't happen. There'll be more discussion about that at the end of September.
Really?
Oh, not until after September then. At the
I
earliest.
think after September 30th, yeah.
Wow.
They sent out, well, I forwarded to all you guys their latest bunch of stuff about that, and it's very difficult to try to interpret, particularly the outings information. But Mark said, yeah, everybody's confused, but don't worry about it. The people who do outings are getting together to try to figure out what they can and can't do in the different clubs. I mean, you'd be surprised how complicated the instructions that come from National can get.
No.
Well, maybe you wouldn't, John. I
know. Get out of here.
Surprised.
Let me ask everyone who's looking at this right now, is the screen that you're seeing, is it the one that's the first screen for Sierra Club that has questions, suggestions at the top?
Yes.
Yes, and then there's a darker green one behind it.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. So that's the one that has Sierra Club meeting agenda. That's all you can see now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I have two screens up for us to view, and I just wanted to make sure I was doing it correctly.
Is our guest here?
I don't think so. Victoria is coming in right now. We can ask her.
I hope that the speaker got your invite so they'll be able to join the meeting.
He does. Jason, I talked last night. He's got it. I sent him the link.
Oh,
good.
okay.
Thank you.
Yes, he's good. And Dan, I'm supposed to report from you from Wendell that he can't be here tonight, that he is still on the road. And he asked me to give the membership update, if that's okay with you.
Well, no, he's coming in right now.
Don't think so, Victoria.
Wendell's coming in now?
That just got a notice. Let's see.
He just texted me. That's too funny.
He's double crossing you again, Victoria.
Well, Wendell, are you there?
It's Wendell. It's Liz disguised as Wendell.
Ah, okay.
Oh, there we go.
I have his since my laptop crashed, I have his, and I can't change. I mean, I go to the Dallas Sierra Club website to sign in, but evidently he's got his name coded in here somewhere, so I come up as him.
Yeah,
You
it's
got a
in
lot
his
of
account.
shady characters.
Yeah.
Can't tell who in the hell they are.
And he texted me and said, tell everybody you won't be there. So it's kind of ironic. So anyway,
Well, I just renamed you, so.
thank you.
Now you're Liz.
Oh, I like it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, he's just on his way back. He got back from the Grand Canyon. So
Wow, I don't think I want to go to the Grand Canyon at this time of year.
Really?
They're
Yeah,
having record heat. They're having
Yeah.
lots of heat out there.
he did Grand Canyon, Zion, and Bryce. I guess Bryce was okay. Zion was pretty hot. Grand Canyon was okay on the north, when you're up in the upper elevation. Anyway, hi, everybody.
Hi there.
And John, and Dan, I do not have any announcements.
Okay.
Your background is beautiful, Liz.
Thank you. It's what he had on the computer. So I love it. I wish it would have, I could never get mine to do some of these things. So maybe trying is what made it crash. I don't know. It was old and tired. Got a lot of use out of it. But now I need-
Okay, how many people we going? We got 13 participants signed in at this point.
Right. And
But it
Lynn
is,
Marple is coming in.
okay, is that your clock, John?
Oh, yes, it is. Let me mute.
So it's saying 7, isn't it?
It is.
So who's coming in? You're muted, John.
Yes, Lynn Marple just arrived.
Hey, Lynn. Everybody tell Lynn happy birthday. She just had a big birthday.
Happy birthday.
Not a big one,
Birthday.
not a big one, a
Yeah.
special.
Happy birthday.
Who? Lynn who?
Lynn Marple, one of our
Oh,
outings
okay.
leaders, longtime Sierran.
And
Well, it
here
is.
comes Renee.
It's after 7 now. I guess we can wait 2 or 3 more minutes for the latecomers that always
Yeah.
show up late.
The refreshments aren't nearly as good online.
No.
Have to admit, yes.
Yeah, in terms of when we go back, we'll be able to go back live. I sent something from National out to all of you guys. Some of you may have actually looked at it. Doesn't look like we'll be having any live meetings before October,
Okay.
but we'll need to start thinking now about lining up Brookhaven. What's her name has retired, so I don't know who we'll be dealing with now. David
David-
will know.
Yeah, David, I'm going to see him at the office tomorrow. If he doesn't come on tonight, I'll ask him tomorrow.
Yeah,
Also, when those students are meeting in person, because that's the main, when is Brookhaven reopening?
yeah. Yeah, if you would, if he doesn't,
I'll make a note.
so we can, start thinking about going back, because possibly come October, we may be able to go back to in-person meetings for the general. We'll never go back to in-person meetings for XCOM. We're going to stay with the Zoom meetings for XCOM.
For now.
Well, the
I know.
discussion I remember was probably forever.
Yeah. I say it'd be fun to get together with a glass of wine now and then.
Well, we'll have the general meeting.
And if we can figure out a way, have a kind of a hybrid meeting, general meeting where we kept in person and Zoom it.
And Zoom.
Hmm. Yeah, that's another thing we
Still on? Oh, no,
we
I'm
had
not.
talked about.
Thought we were gonna watch it on here. Oh, okay.
I hear that Dallas College is kind of in disarray. They've had such losses with the pandemic. One of my friends teaches different campuses.
Yeah, David teaches at Brookhaven.
Oh,
Lynn,
that's
what are they
right.
doing at UTD?
Who are you asking?
Lynn Marple?
Mhm. All right, John, I think we're gonna go ahead and start this meeting now, okay?
Okay, we got 18 on board right now.
Yeah, so welcome to the July general meeting of the Dallas Sierra Club Group. Do we have anyone need to make announcements?
I have an announcement.
Who's that, Renee?
Yes.
Renee, all we can see is your headband.
Let me try it. There.
That's better.
We were seeing the puppy dog up on the shelf, but not you.
I'm sorry. I had a hard time getting on. I don't know what's wrong with the computer. I have an announcement with the speaker that we're going to have in August. He hasn't gotten his material back to me yet so that we can put it on the website. I'm supposed to meet with him again on Thursday so we can iron out what he will talk about. And you know, I'll get it up, make sure it gets where it's supposed to go as soon as possible.
Who is that, Renee?
His name is Craig Taylor. And he's
Okay,
his name's Craig Taylor.
Okay.
He is a hydrologist.
okay, and what month are we talking about here?
We're talking about August.
August, okay.
And
All right.
on the 23rd of July, Sahan and I will be doing a short presentation, question answer with the youth from Trinity River Conservation.
Okay, good. Is Sahan, has Sahan checked in? Or is he still out west?
He
He's
might
not-
still be out west.
He's out west. He had asked, I'm drawing a
Yeah,
blank.
someone else to do notes, but we didn't have
Yeah, Will Huddleston.
and we
That
did
was for
not-
XCOM. Yeah, that was for XCOM.
I'm
It
sorry.
was, but we did not meet because we lacked
Right.
a voting quorum.
Right.
There was something I wanted to ask you, Victoria, but now it has slipped my mind, so I guess it wasn't important.
You can always call me later or email.
Yeah. Are there any other announcements before we go on to our committee reports? And again, I will repeat that information or guidance, I guess you could call it in quotes, from National has come to me and I forwarded to all of you about when we're going to start meeting in person. It's very difficult to interpret, especially the outings information, which I sent on to Mark and he said, yeah, it's a mess. And you people that do outings are kind of getting together on your own to try to figure out what it means. And it doesn't look like we will meet in person for general meetings until possibly October. They will be making more decisions at the end of September is what I got out of the guidance. John?
I just wanted to relate something from Lone Star chapter. At our last board meeting, a suggestion came up based upon the failure of the Texas grid back in February and what happened several weeks ago about the grid possibly being impacted by the heat. That this summer we may have a extreme hot summer, and the grid may face some stresses again where it may fail. And the suggestion came up, and we are looking into the possibility, haven't done anything about it yet, just talking about it, of having kind of a rapid response for Sierra Club members in Texas, because we have like 25,000 or so Sierra Club members here in the state of Texas, of having kind of a rapid response where all the 27,000 members are notified at once somehow about there being a EEA3 emergency alert that we're coming close to failing, and to have each one of those members do whatever they can to get electricity usage reduced. And it could be that if we're able to do this, assuming we can put it together, that it could prevent the Texas grid from failing if you have 27,000 people plus doing something about it right then and there. So just to give you a heads up, if something comes down the pike, and I'm not saying it's going to, but if it does, you have a kind of a heads up of the possibility of it happening. So fingers crossed that we can put it together, because this summer is going to be a hot one, and I don't think we've got enough grid capacity to handle it. Quite
No
frankly.
worries, John. I'll crank up my solar panels.
Yeah, I've got mine going full blast too.
Okay. All right. Then I think we're ready to move on to committee reports. Are we not? No further announcements. Let's go to the Conservation / Eco Action Committee. Victoria.
Thank you, Dan, and lovely to see you all virtually again tonight. Thanks so much for being here. So we continue at Conservation and Eco Action to really focus right now on 2 Superfund sites that we have formally partnered with community groups in the area working on them. And also, more than I can count, batch plants that are in violation of their permits. Our colleague Catherine Bazan, in fact, is out with Rita Beving tonight at meetings concerning them. And we've been lucky enough to be supported by the city of Dallas, and to the extent that they are actually prosecuting and I guess sending injunctions to these violator batch plants. So lots going on, lots happening. If Dan, if I may, since you have me, could I go ahead and give my my spiel quickly about Wendell and his new membership? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, since he's next. I'm also filling in for Wendell since he's on the road tonight, not quite back, as Liz said. And he wanted me to be sure to tell you that it should be this fall that we will have our new Dallas Sierra Club promotional video with interviews of Dan and hopefully Dick and Chris Gouldy and many of our other beloved colleagues. And it will be a nice introduction to our club, and it should be going up on the website and Facebook page. So Wendell says to stay tuned. And that is all I got. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Okay, I have a question, Victoria.
Yes.
I recently sent out an email to the XCOM that we were going to give Marcus Russell $350, as you had suggested, to buy certain tools and things. And has Arthur checked in, John, or not?
I haven't seen him, no.
Well, the next step would be for Arthur to send Marcus a check.
Mhm.
And I haven't heard anything back from Arthur about doing that. And he's not here, so I can't ask him.
I'll follow up. And for those of everyone in the audience who may not be familiar, the Dallas Sierra Club actually has a grant form and a grant submission process. So our friend Marcus Russell was able to apply for a small grant for his urban garden project. And we were happy to help out with some tools and shovels. So that's what Dan's referring to. And Dan, yes, I will follow up with both Arthur and Marcus and make sure that that gets taken care of.
Arthur had said something to me in an earlier phone call about he'd had trouble in the past getting some kind of paperwork that he needed from Marcus.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't remember the details of it or what he did about it, but
Well, have you sent a check request to Arthur?
I will. I thought I would wait to make sure that Arthur is in town, and sometimes his email's a little wonky. So
Okay.
sometimes it's better for me to text him. So I will follow up and contact him in whatever way is preferable and make sure it's all taken care of.
Yeah, because he's always on that. Hey,
Yes,
somebody has to send me a
yes.
check request. I don't write them unless
Yep.
I get a check request.
You are
What's the
absolutely right.
paperwork in addition to the grant application that you needed?
It's a request. It's a request for funds from Arthur that we
Okay.
have to send just for
Well-
any grant request.
the things Arthur would need would be receipts for the things that Marcus used the money for primarily.
Okay. I'll
Could I
follow
ask-
up on that.
Could I ask Victoria a quick question?
Yes.
Great to see you and exciting about the teaming up with City of Dallas. You mentioned also that y'all's effort was partnering with community groups. Is that on the same issue or was that something else?
Those are these Superfund sites. So we are official partners with the Lane Plating CAG, CAG, which stands for
for it.
Citizens Advisory Group. And so that is concerning the Superfund site there on Bonnie View and Loop 12. And then the other Superfund site, and I should say Superfund site in quotations, it's not been officially declared, but we expect that declaration to come publicly within the next couple weeks. And so that group in Garland is several neighborhood groups: Clean Up Garland, Meadowlark, East Dallas Greater Good.
Cool.
Okay, and Renee already had mentioned what the program is supposed to be for next month,
Yes.
and you might go ahead and reiterate that.
As Renee said, we're going to be having a hydrologist. Chris is going to be here talking to us, and Renee is absolutely correct. As soon as she talks to him and we get the definite information, it will be up on the website and a groovy digital flyer will be made. And can I ask the group at large, we tried something new advertising this month. We boosted our Sierra Club flyers, which basically means they became Facebook advertisements. Did anyone happen to get one or see it? And did you find it effective? If anyone had noticed or has an opinion, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, we would love to know what's working and what's not working in terms of our advertising.
So this would come up on a person's homepage.
This would be on a Facebook. So it is a Facebook ad that is chosen for people that have interests in green lifestyle, environmentalism, racial injustice, so on and so forth. There's tags that I put in of who to target as an audience for the ads.
And it goes to their Facebook homepage?
Not their homepage. It'll show up as an ad. It's like a pop-up ad, like you
Oh.
see, you know, Belk or Kroger, whoever sends you an ad.
Nobody, because I always delete them. Okay, well, I don't recall, what did it say? I mean,
It should have been our flyer. It should have been our, I'll take a screenshot of mine
Okay.
and send it out to XCOM so you all can see what it looked like.
Okay.
I'm just not sure that it targeted as well as I wanted it to. So
was a flyer about this meeting we're having now?
Yes. Yeah, the
Okay.
flyer that I
think
put up
maybe
on
I
our
did get
Facebook.
that. I think I got
Oh, good.
that.
Okay, good, good.
We were trying to, we've lost the ability to hard copy advertise. And so we were trying to do something that was more effective and something that was on social media, because at one point I would go to different key places and pass out, put a stack of flyers. And then even before COVID, it was getting to where some of these places would not let me put flyers out. So that limited our advertising. So we wanted to get the most out for you know, the bang for your buck, as they say. We just wanted to know if anybody's getting those and do you like it? Because that was the better way to do it.
Okay. Okay.
This
now-
is Rehan. I have actually looked at the Facebook. Victoria, we have a Facebook page called Coal Free World,
Okay.
and I don't see anything from Dallas
Okay.
here.
Okay, this would have come up just on individuals' Facebook feeds as an advertisement. It would not have been posted to a specific page outside of ours where I specifically posted it. So no worries. I didn't mean to take up time of the meeting. Just a quick curiosity question.
Okay, well, remember, curiosity killed the cat, Victoria.
But satisfaction brought him back.
Oh, I like
Huh?
that.
What? I
You
don't
haven't
get
heard that?
I've
It's
never
curi-
heard that.
It's curiosity
out.
killed the cat, but satisfaction brought him back.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me, but we don't have time to pursue it right
Oh, you
now.
don't? Come on.
Now, okay, Wendell is up next, and Liz and Victoria, you both said you might have something to contribute there on the volunteer.
All right, Victoria already made that that information.
Yes, I am good and done, and thank you all.
Okay, so we're done with Wendell.
Yes.
Okay, David is not here, right?
I have not seen him, no.
Okay, and still no Arthur?
No.
He better be dead.
Dan,
Say that.
Okay. By the way, Victoria, when I really need to talk to Arthur, I call him on the phone.
I know. I got it. I cover all the bases. Phone, text, email.
And
We're
don't
good.
wait, don't email, forget about it, forget about it. Phone, he'll answer. Okay, so David is not here. Liz, you've already said you don't have anything you want to say about ICO. What
ICO
about
We're just still on.
training for leaders and outdoor leaders?
For the previous leaders, we have a refresher OLT, which is our leader training scheduled for September 1st. We're working on a way to also get them up to date, everybody up to date on their first aid. For those newly interested in becoming leaders, it'll be an in-person training later. But we're working on getting previous, experienced leaders back up to snuff as soon as possible so we can get outings back on the calendar.
And Mark, the guidance had numbers about groups of various sizes that could meet and couldn't meet without going through national and all kind of crap like that. So I guess that Mark and you are really up on this, what you're doing, right?
Yes, we're working on it. There was some confusion on whether or not simple day hikes needed a safety management plan that had to be approved by national and all that kind of thing. And we worked through it.
Okay. Yeah, because I tried to read it and I pretty much gave up. And
Yeah.
Mark said, yeah, it's confusing. But anyway, you all are on it. So
Got it.
that's what matters. So at this point, I think, Victoria, we're ready for you to introduce our speaker and have him make a presentation.
Yes, sir. I am so pleased to announce and introduce our friend and colleague, Jace Proctor. Jace has been on the Conservation Eco Action Committee with us for the last 3 months, I think, and he has been a godsend in our work that we're doing with the Superfund sites, as his specialty is water, urban water, wetlands, water conservation, the whole shebang. And he's knowledgeable as hell on native tree species, which is another project we're looking at working on. So without further ado, Jace, thank you so much for being here and thank you for your patience. And thank you for putting up with me where I call and bug you all the time about lane plating.
All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Victoria. let me go ahead and share my screen before I give an introduction about my background and what I'll be talking to you all about today.
I need to allow you to do that. Dun, 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 dun. Hold on a minute because I can't find where we are. Okay, you should be able to do it now, Jace. Try it now. There we
There
go.
we go.
Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So as Victoria mentioned, I have a background with water. Specifically, I have a degree from the University of North Texas, graduate degree in water resources management. So I graduated there with a geography degree, and I studied urban wetlands, which we'll be talking about later on in the presentation. So this is kind of a two-part presentation. Quite the undertaking to fit it in the time that we have. So I'm gonna zoom through the information. No pun intended, but it will be rather quick. So I will ask that everybody, if they can, save your questions for the end. I'll try to give about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So the first part we're going to talk about today is best management practices along the Trinity River. And the format for this presentation is using StoryMap. So if anybody's familiar with ArcMap, ArcGIS, or the kind of umbrella company who creates these mapping tools, Esri, StoryMap is created by Esri, and it's a way to give somebody a virtual tour of an area. So it uses text, images, obviously photos, videos, maps, all sorts of material. And as I scroll through this presentation today, please don't feel like you need to read all the words because I'll be going a little quickly and there is a lot. So I'm going to talk us through it and just kind of introduce you guys to the topic that the StoryMap covers and give you guys kind of a feel for how it's used. This is available for the public, so anybody can access it through TRWD's website. So I used to work for them. I created this when I interned for them. I no longer work for them, but I felt that it was important information to get out and I wanted to share it. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So best management practices along the Trinity River, or BMPs, as the acronym is often referred to. So the StoryMap first starts out with the idea of where does your water come from? Many people don't know. So the short answer is here in North Texas, it comes from our reservoirs. And the difference between a lake and a reservoir is reservoirs are man-made. And we all live in a watershed. And this is a term that maybe gets thrown around a lot, but we may not know what that means. So watershed is a drainage area, and it's created by low elevations and high elevations. So here in this image, you can see there's this divide, and this divide divides two different watersheds. So wherever we live at, we're in a watershed, we're part of the water cycle, and water is going to drain to creeks, streams, wetlands, and then eventually lakes, because here in North Texas, our watershed is the Trinity River, and it's connected by various lakes, and then eventually goes out to the ocean near the Houston area. So TRWD is a water utility district. They own several reservoirs in Navarro, Ellis counties, other counties in Fort Worth. Their main campus is in Fort Worth. And here this image shows a portion of the Trinity River that they have jurisdiction over. They have a buffer jurisdiction over this area, which is given to them by the Army Corps of Engineers. They authorize that. And the EPA has created what's called the National Pollutant Elimination Discharge System. Quite a mouthful to say. And basically all that means is that they regulate our drinking water supply. And how they do this is they sample in our creeks and streams and reservoirs and enforce that we do whatever we have to keep that clean and that we monitor it. Well, in Texas, we have our own form of that, and TCEQ regulates that. So that would be the Texas Pollutant Elimination Discharge System. And then when that goes down to cities at the municipal level, they have what's called MS4 permits, or Municipal Separate Stormwater Sewer Systems. And this is a way that the cities can kind of make sure that they have a measure of accountability and they can take care of that themselves and they don't get docked by the TCEQ. So an MS4 permit, the number on the end refers to the size of population. So these are, just think of them as conveyance systems that discharge water from the urban area into, in this case, the Trinity River. So TRWD having jurisdiction over this, they're very interested in any redevelopment or any development that happens along this river corridor. Anybody who's doing so is going to follow what's called the Water Quality Guidance Manual that they have developed. And that essentially implements these best management practices that I spoke of. So why is this important? And why should we care about it in the urban setting? You know, what's special about the urban setting? Well, we have a lot of concrete. We don't have as much grass. We don't have, therefore, as much permeable surface. So when it rains, through the process of infiltration, as it's referred to, water hits the ground, and where there's grass, you know, where there's soil, where there's permeable surfaces, that can soak into the ground. But when it's concrete, it just turns into sheet flow and it has a high velocity as it moves towards these lower elevations. And that can contribute towards more erosion, more mobilization of pollutants, so on and so forth. So this graph here shows, go ahead and minimize this. This graph here shows the change in population in Tarrant County and how that coincides with the total percent increase in impervious surface. So this is a problem that we need to deal with, or consideration at least. And as we continue to develop and grow a population, it's something we need to consider. So again, as I mentioned, due to the effects of population growth and urban development, we have an increase in impervious surface. And one way to kind of combat this happenstance is using best management practices, or what is also referred to sometimes in the stormwater world as green stormwater infrastructure. And we're going to be looking at some examples of these. And just in case you're interested in these, maybe you want to do some in a residential area, maybe you're a developer, or you just want to share this information with people. When choosing a BMP, you need to look at the geography of the area, look at the hydrology of the area, and from that you can decipher what kind of BMP you need to use. Maybe there's multiple issues that you like to resolve, so you can use different BMPs that are connected and form a treatment train. So as it moves from one BMP, it then goes to another, and the water increasingly becomes cleaner. And then those benefits of the water, which we'll talk about, kind of get spread out over a larger surface area. And then of course, there's a maintenance component that goes into it as well. So here's, just to start off simple, a stormwater inlet. So if this inlet wasn't here, you see pooling here. Maybe in large storm surge events, it could even go over the curve. So these are just really common things that maybe you overlook, but they're very important. And then with this story map, I have put in links so you can learn more about these. And you'll see these links as I move through. This is a retention or irrigation basin. So if you can see here in the back, there's sprinklers, and these sprinklers are fed by this wetland. So as the wetland fills up, captures stormwater, they can reuse that. So it's totally up the alley of conservation of water, and they can reuse that on the surrounding landscape. This is an example of constructed wetlands. So this is actually a picture of one of my thesis sites. You can tell it's quite a bit different. You don't usually see wetlands like this in the urban area. And you can see one of the differences is there's a lot of vegetation. So these are really made to mimic or act as what you would maybe see in more of a natural setting where there's not a lot of urbanization. And when you have all these plants at play here, you begin to create a whole self-regulated ecosystem. So that means that you don't need humans to come here and manage it. The ecosystem regulates itself. So you get a whole food chain, a food web of wildlife, such as birds, fish, insects. When you have the fish, they can control for mosquitoes. When you have the plants, they can uptake the extra nutrients that may be received by the wetland from nearby fertilization of lawns, for instance. So when you have all these components that are traditionally in a wetland, then you can have a really not only beautiful, in my opinion, area, but you can create habitat structure for wildlife, and it serves more purposes, has more benefits, more amenities, more ecosystem services, as they're also referred to within this type of wetland. And then this would be the outlet. So you can have outlets depending on the type of wetland. And I did forget to mention this, the Army Corps of Engineers actually restored these wetlands, which I'll get to in my kind of second half of my presentation. So this is maybe what we're more used to seeing in the urban area, a pond. The nearby ponds here have fountains in them, so you'll see that a lot. Steeply sloped contours right up to the residential area. So these are really just made to look good, right? They have managed turf grass around, not a lot of vegetation. And they're really designed to just prevent from flooding, property damage, and then just to look good. They'll stock these with fish. So here you can see the inlet, it's channeled towards here. And then in this picture here, you can see the outlet. So this pond here is at full capacity, nearly. So this is an example of permeable concrete. So you can have walkways, even parking lots. Sometimes it's cheaper just to do sections of parking lots rather than the whole parking lot, and make it out of this permeable concrete. So this means that when it rains, it can actually seep through the concrete, and it reduces that runoff that you traditionally see with conventional concrete. There's also permeable pavers. So in these little gaps in between these pavers, water can infiltrate down into the ground, and reducing the amount of water that enters into the gutter. Then there's trench drains, which can capture runoff, and then you can channel that towards, a BMP, or just channel it through a drainage system. Then there are bioretention basins and curb cuts. So just imagine water can go through the curb and then enter into this area where there's vegetation. And then there is an outlet in case there gets to be too much water, so it doesn't get waterlogged. But this allows the plants, the soil can clean that water, allow it to infiltrate deeper into the ground before it goes into the storm system. And just to remind everybody, this is cleaning the water, whereas if these things were in place, the water would be dirtier. So our drinking water would be dirtier. So once you start adding plants into the equation, there are a lot more benefits that you can derive from a stormwater BMP. In this case, you have rocks which slow down the energy. So if you didn't have the rocks there, maybe you have more erosion, more displacement of soil, so that really just slows it down, and then it can more gently soak into the landscape that you see here. So that would be a splash pad. This is another type of energy dissipation. So this is a rock channel. So it incorporates curb cuts. The water comes from the parking lot, it gets slowed down by the rocks. Then there's some infiltration happening into the ground before it enters into the drain. These are grass swells combined with check dams. So this slopes down and that water carries momentum. It carries kinetic energy. So these check dams placed in these intervals help slow that down and give it a better chance for it to infiltrate down into the ground. Then you have vegetated filter strips. So these are just areas that are vegetated next to a flat surface. Somewhat similar to a bioswale or a grass swell. And then you have landscaping. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of benefits. So you can attract wildlife, pollinator species. Depending on the plants you plant, they can provide fruiting bodies the animals can eat. You can also obviously make the area look more beautiful. There are also associations with air quality. So through evapotranspiration, plants produce moisture into the atmosphere, and that can cool surrounding temperatures. And then in the plant roots, especially when you have native plants, they don't need as much water, so you can conserve water. And then these native plants have these beneficial relationships with the wildlife. And let's say if you want to plant native bunch grasses, they have really deep tap roots, which increase that infiltration down into the ground. And depending on your area, what your light requirements are, your water requirements, your soil types, there are different plants that you'll want to plant. So this link would just link you to a list kind of describing that. And kind of same thing here. So this is a riparian buffer. So before water would enter into the Trinity River here, you have all of these native plants that can do everything I just mentioned. So these are also really important for water quality as well. And then this is an example of a site that worked closely with TRWD. This is a dog park. And you can imagine, E. coli bacteria, coliforms, the feces of the dogs, it would have otherwise just drained right here into the Trinity River. But what they did is they created a ditch here, which I'll zoom up on. Essentially a channeled area, just a swale that has some vegetation in it. And then that gets channeled downhill to this drain, which filters out large debris. And then that drain takes a right angle and then out into the river. So for the conclusion, these can be amenities. Oftentimes when developers think about environmentalism, perhaps they think it's extra money. Why would we have to do this when we haven't been doing it? With this story map, it really just kind of unveils that these things are being done in the urban environment, that they can be amenities, they can look beautiful, they have a lot of beneficial aspects related to them as well, not just for wildlife, but for us too, especially in association with helping keep our water clean. So then we have some links down here to learn more if anybody's interested. So that's it for this presentation. And this kind of introduced you to the idea of stormwater BMPs, which I'll now get into with a little bit more specifically with my thesis research. So I had mentioned that I studied 13 urban wetlands in Frisco, Texas, and I showed one of the pictures of that in the previous presentation. Here we're going to be talking about my thesis research with all these 13 wetlands, what I did, why I did it, why it's important, and so on and so forth. So let's get into it. So as I mentioned, Frisco, Texas, I studied water birds in wetlands. So I went out there approximately once a week for a year, and I surveyed for water birds. And then seasonally, I took other environmental variables into consideration, such as plants, water depth, surrounding urban areas, so on and so forth. And I had a total of 45 sampling dates. And this field of study can be kind of umbrellaed within biogeography, ecology, and limnology. So I wanted to be able to answer the questions of what were the consequences of not doing this research, to really put it into perspective. And that would be that, we wouldn't be upholding, a biodiversity initiative that we talk about in our policy making. In the urban area, they oftentimes manipulate wetlands to look more like the other wetlands we had just seen. They also will destroy wetlands and sometimes completely drain them and so on and so forth. So this thesis is really looking at that and comparing these different wetlands to more natural wetlands. So it was in Eastern Denton County, and water birds have a historic decline. So it's important that you continue to monitor these because it can change every year. They're highly geographical. In Texas just alone, there's over 50% loss of the wetlands from the 1780s to now. So again, just putting this into context, it's mostly due to silviculture, but in the past, farming and settlement had a huge part to play in it. And as I mentioned, urbanization really affects the way that these wetlands are managed. And I did mention that the more natural wetlands were reconstructed wetlands by the Corps of Engineers. So I did used to work for them, and that's how I became familiar with those wetlands. I even helped in the restoration, which just involved planting native plants. And then it kind of cleaning up the area so there's a recreation component, so there's trails that you can walk by. Now, the research questions I want to address were whether or not the wetland sites included in the study offer viable habitat for water birds, and at what degree of abundance and diversity are they observed at a given wetland location. And then what about a given wetland draws the water birds in? What specific habitat variables are responsible for which water bird species or absence? And again, if we don't answer these questions, then maybe we'll continue to grow and develop in a way that's not sustainable for water bird populations. And organisms may lose access to certain ecosystem services. And to just put this in context, we oftentimes think about that kind of in a human-centric way of how do we benefit, but we need to think that other wildlife benefit as well. So these are all the variables that I looked at. And this just kind of describes it for you. There's a lot there. I looked at tree species, plants. I did a bunch of different variables, which you can ask some questions about later on if you like. And for my data collection, when I went and surveyed for the plants, I just ranked them and I made these sections within a wetland. So when I went up to the wetland, I would put how many birds I saw in each section, and then those birds and those species of birds and the number of them could be associated with these different habitat variables respective to the wetland. So the idea is that not all areas of the wetland are the same. They can have different plants in them, different depth levels, different things going on. So this map here just really details that. This map here was looking at the spatial component of a given wetland. So looking at what's around it that may affect a water bird being there. So different wetlands that are around the area, and proximity to them, proximity to rivers and creeks, proximity to lakes. And I looked at this within a 3,300 foot buffer area. I took a depth analysis of the wetlands, which was the hardest part, to be honest. And some of the wetlands, some of the more natural wetlands that the Army Corps of Engineers reconstructed would dry up in the summer. So this just speaks to how natural wetlands have this drawdown period. And this can be beneficial for seed dispersal. It can be beneficial for other water birds that probe in the mud and look for insects. And then as these waters dry up, food resources become more concentrated in these more shallow pools, and those it's kind of easy pickings for a lot of the wading birds. So in this picture, you can see some great white egrets.
Jace, I don't see any picture of egrets. I'm still on the first slide that you showed here, the introduction.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been going through these slides.
We're not seeing them, are we, people?
Last one I have is it stopped at the Tarrant Regional Water.
Okay, now we're going.
Okay, sorry for that mishap. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, here in this picture, you can see egrets. At the end, I can just scroll through some of these pictures if you guys are interested in seeing it. So here's a map of the contours, the depth contours of one of the wetlands. I also took perimeter and surface area of the wetlands. And then when it was all said and done, I collapsed the data. So I collapsed the plants into classes. So emergent aquatic plants, submerged, floating leaf, terrestrial plants. And I took the coordinates. So Latitude and longitude is a separate variable, but it doesn't mean anything by itself. It only means something with them together. So I did what's called a principal components analysis to combine that into one value. And these coordinates were associated with each of the sections within a wetland. So in this particular chart you're looking at over here, it's just looking at one of the wetlands, and then for each section, what these plants were. And this is a ranking system that I used for that, which allows you to be able to approximate these plants rather than have to get it specific. So there's a window of percentage of cover. And then I collapsed the water bird species into these classes. So dabbling ducks usually eat vegetation. Diving ducks will eat fish and macroinvertebrates. Then there's the moist soil foragers, which will eat bugs and insects and macroinvertebrates. Then you have your dense vegetation waders, which you don't see often because they kind of hide out in dense vegetation. And these are the most underrepresented because they're kind of secretive, and just in general, they're more rare. And then your open water waders would be your egrets and your herons. I crossed out aerial piscivores because I only saw 2 the whole time. So I just cut that out of the data. As I mentioned, I did a lot of mapping stuff when I looked at the geography of the area. I used ArcGIS to do this. And I used our statistical software program to run what's called a random forest model. I ran one model which predicted for species count, and then another model which predicted for bird class. So again, that would be those feeding groups I just mentioned: the dabbling ducks, the divers, the moist soil foragers, the wading birds. And then I ran it through what's called an MCA. So this is a multiple correspondence analysis and allows you to work with data that is not linear. So for instance, when I went out there, hypothetically, if I had been out there 20 minutes earlier, I could have seen something different. So it's convenient sampling, and it just allows you to be able to account for that. And then this shows the descriptive statistics. So the wetland that had the highest counts, the highest sums, was right here. And this is one of those more traditional urban wetlands that have fountains coming out of them. But I will say they didn't have the most diversity. Those are the restored wetlands that had all of the aquatic plants in them. So just to go over this now that we can all see it, the SC5, the Stewart Creek wetlands, these are restoration wetlands by the Army Corps of Engineers. And then the HC, Hickory Creek, these are also restoration wetlands that the Army Corps of Engineers created. And they're on the east side here, northeast side of Lake Louisville. So that just shows that information. And a total of 5,724 species were observed during my study period. So this just details that. These were all of the different species of the dabbling ducks, or the tip dabble ducks that I observed. These are the different species of the diving, so on and so forth. As I mentioned, the dense vegetation waders were the least. So a total of 30 different species. And then this tells you the number within these feeding classes that I saw. And then there's that 5,724.
What was that 5,000 number again?
That was the total count of birds, total birds that I observed during the study period.
Which included 30 different species.
Right, 30 different species, but within those species, 5,724. So if I can go out there and I can see, multiple godwalls, for instance, at a given wetland. But that's just one species.
Right.
And then I created some stacked bar charts just showing, respective to the time, respective to the count, respective to the wetland, and respective to the bird species. So there's a lot of information packed on just one of these graphs here. But the takeaway here is, again, that the restoration wetlands had the most diversity, but again, the highest count overall was for one of the neighborhood ponds. And they really favored diving birds. So you can see that right here, and specifically lesser scalp. So these are mollusk eating birds. They eat fish. These ponds were stocked with fish. So that was a unique characteristic of these ponds. They also had tree species near them that offered Chinese pistache fruit, live oak, red oak trees that produced acorns for mallards that were there year round. But again, mostly diving birds were represented. And again, just mostly by this pond, you can see that some of the different HL ponds, not as much. This HL4 pond was the most shallow. This is the model prediction. So the predicted species count, bird class by site. So with a model, it's going to more easily be able to predict for a site if there were more people, or sorry, more water birds there. So where it comes out here the most, dip dabblers, because they were the most abundant class, most abundant feeding class that I saw. The least, again, were the moist soil foragers, the dense vegetation waders, and open water waders. So with a lot of these birds, they'll be in groups, but the open water waders, like the herons and the egrets, they're kind of solo. They don't fly together oftentimes. They do their own thing. I will, however, say though that they do live in colonies, so they nest together, but they don't typically feed together. So that's a unique difference. And again, you can see this represented over here, the dip dabblers, most easily and most abundantly represented, followed by the diving birds and then the open water waders. These birds were least commonly seen. But I mentioned that the HL, Heritage Lakes, is what it stands for. Pond 4 had the least total sums, but they were the most strongly able to predict moist soil foragers. So there were 2 species that were there almost consistently every time that I went there. One of them is a near threatened species called a snowy plover, and they hung out on this concrete spillway, and they were just eating food that came by. So the water level is really right up to that spillway, and then all these ponds in the HL sites, Heritage Lake sites, are connected through these channelized spillways. So that was a unique finding. And then because I spent so much work on depth and looking at them respective to the sections, this is a heat bar chart that shows for this case, Heritage Lakes Pond 3, this is the one that had the most total sums in it. So I wanted to show this one in the presentation. Most of them were seen in section O, and they were the lesser scalp. So these are diving birds, and section O was the deepest part of the wetland. So they come during the winter, and when in a wetland, it's warmer on the bottom and it's colder on the top. So the fish can, probably were hanging out there in that deeper part because it was warmer. And there was more space for these birds to dive and find food. So that was an interesting finding. And then here are the results of the MCA. Again, I'm just gonna fly through this real quickly. If there you see a positive sign, that means that there's a positive relationship. There's a positive correlation. If you see a negative sign, it means that there's a negative one. So that means the absence of these things are better at predicting for the species being there. If there's nothing at all, then there's no correlation at all. So really the big takeaways here are that tree species were, for instance, were really helpful for predicting for dip dabblers, which eat vegetation, as well as dense vegetation waders. So that just, it adds cover for these dense vegetation waders. And these trees, it was gathered by doing a 100-foot buffer around the wetlands and then just doing the percent of coverage next to them. So the areas that had the most trees were the restoration sites. And they also had wetlands that were nearby and streams and more of a complex ecosystem, not a bunch of houses, for instance. Then you see, for instance, grass. So with the dip dabblers, There's grass. Again, you can ask questions about this later on if you'd like. It does kind of get complex, and I don't want to get into the weeds about it. But this was essentially all my findings went down into this, and this helped me kind of decipher what had really happened. So the conclusion are that there's variable services within the urban context, but both kinds of wetlands support water bird populations. The dip dabblers were the most common, therefore the easiest to predict in the model. The heritage lake sites had many diving birds, such as the lesser scaup, as we talked about, perhaps due to deeper depths, and fish, and the presence of crepicula, mussels, snail populations. The open water waders were pretty evenly dispersed throughout. And the dense vegetation waders were sparse in general, but were most common at the restoration wetlands. The moist soil foragers favored rocky outcrops. So I talked about that really shallow wetland that was in heritage lakes. Specifically, the killdeer species and the snowy plover favored the stormwater wetland. As I also refer to them because they're just made for stormwater, really not for ecosystems necessarily, ecosystem services or benefits for wildlife. And then the restoration wetlands in general hosted more diversity and had a higher average mean, a higher species diversity. And difficulties I encountered were there were a lot of O's, so a lot of zeros. When you're working with large data, that can be a problem. And in my case, the zeros actually meant something. So that needed to be accounted for. I had to collapse the data, but that was at a cost. So really, I should have done a cluster analysis and kept all of it separate. And I can explain more of that if you're interested. And then I did convenient sampling. So that means I didn't sample on the same day, every week, at the same time. I went out there when I was able to. I went out there at different times. So again, that just speaks to how there could have been something different 10 minutes before I arrived. There could have been something there 10 minutes after I arrived. But with this study, you know, there's certain logistics such as distance and location. So I lived in Denton, this was in Frisco. So these are just things to consider when you're surveying for environmental data. And then more data, right? If I would have done it for 2 years, 3 years, if I would have went out for more, you know, more survey periods, I would have had a better idea of what was going on. If I would have sampled for macroinvertebrates and vertebrates such as fish, then maybe I could have drawn more conclusions about, you know, why water birds were at one wetland versus another. And again, since populations fluctuate, consistent observations and monitoring of water birds is helpful. And that's especially true within a rapidly changing urbanized landscape. So this was just a snapshot of a place in a given time. So that's all I have. I know that was a lot. If anybody has any questions, hopefully there's time to answer at least a few. But thank you for your time.
Okay, do we have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, that was a tremendous amount of work that you did. I can't imagine. That was just unbelievable how much work you did. I was wondering, especially with the egrets, are they two things? This is a compound question. When you see egrets, there was a neighborhood not too long ago on the news, and they were getting dive bombed by egrets. And I just wondered if those are water birds, is there something that would make them come inland? And then what's the detrimental effect to ecosystems if we did not have any water birds?
Those are first question was very interesting. It's kind of nuanced. And the second question is also a cool question. So for the first part, you know, that's really unusual behavior. I know with like seagulls, for instance, they'll dive bomb people if they have food on the beach. I know that Canadian geese can be really aggressive if you get near them. I've never heard of that for egrets though. And I do know, for instance, when there's predator species like, you know, eagles, for instance, that will go towards the nests of egrets to get their young, they just flee. They don't try to fight off the eagle or anything, they just leave. So that's not a behavior that I would, you know, guess that they would partake in. That's interesting. And then in terms of waterfowl, so with any given species, or for that matter, with a wetland, you can look at it in the context of ecosystem services. So these are a group of different services, they fall in different categories that humans can derive from an ecosystem or from a species. So for waterfowl, one of them is cultural, right? We maybe have, some people at least have pink flamingos in their lawn. The Heritage Lake sites I went to, they actually had a picture of a water bird on the sign before you entered into it. There's also, right, there's, it's in their cultural representations, symbols, memories. Then there's also provisioning services. So some people like to hunt. Some people just like to feed ducks, although in a lot of these wetlands, you're not supposed to. Or they just like to see them, to interact with them. Then there's also regulating services. So they can be disease indicators, right? They can catch diseases, and they can be bioindicators for disease spread, with the bird flu and that sort of thing. They can also be bioindicators for the health of a wetland. So that's why I actually looked at these species and compared these different wetlands to get a better idea about the quality of these wetlands and the amount of habitat structure that they provide. So, if you see a lot more species that favor vegetation, you can automatically surmise that there's more, diverse vegetation there for them. So they can tell you a lot about an area depending on where, you observe them at. These are just some of the reasons. They can help disperse seeds, so when they go and they feed, they can spread those seeds. They can, when they do that, they can mix up the nutrients in the soil and spread them out a little bit. So there's all sorts of benefits that they have. They can eat bugs, a lot of people are afraid of mosquitoes around wetlands, but when you have the wildlife there, they can control for those populations. They can control mosquitoes. So those are just some benefits.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I don't hear any. So Jace, thank you very much.
I have a question.
Okay, Julie, where were you?
I was in the kitchen. Sorry, something was about to burn. It was a good program, Jace, very informative. And I just wanted to ask you, I know this is a little off your specialty. You went into some detail about the different types of permeable paving and
Right.
concrete. Have you seen any studies of, or just information on what cities in this area allow or require in terms of permeable paving? Because I know here in Dallas, there's a lot of building going on, and it continually decreases the amount of retention of water in the soil because all the businesses are putting in solid concrete.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So all the pictures that you saw on that first story map, they were pictures that I got from this area. So I took pictures in Frisco, Denton, Fort Worth. So these are being used in our urban area. BRIT, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, has a lot of them. But to more specifically answer your question, the North Central Texas Council of Governments, they have a stormwater program called ISWIM, which stands for Integrated Stormwater Management. And it promotes the use of these sorts of stormwater BMPs I spoke of. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not something that's, really taken on by, I don't know if it's the capital improvement division within cities or, that kind of thing. But you are starting to see it more so. You'll more than likely see it at city buildings. You'll see these types of landscapes in these stormwater implements, especially in new development with city infrastructure that's owned by the city. So I don't want to say it's progressive because I saw some of these things at like a 7-Eleven. I saw them in front of a Walmart in Frisco. So it really depends on the city. The cities are the ones who really enforce these things. There'd be the watershed coordinators, the watershed managers for cities, people who work in stormwater. Now, again, I can tell you that each city is kind of operates differently, and they have a certain amount of money set aside for it, and they take it a little more seriously and handle it differently than other cities do. But it is being used and it is out there.
Great, that's good to know, because the City of Dallas Climate Action Plan that was approved unanimously by council the last term, I don't know if it mandated, it stated as a goal to have green infrastructure to slow down water flow and to do multiple improvements that promote climate mitigation.
Yeah, I do want to point out though that it's not just on the cities to mandate it or make it happen. It can be on developers too. And that's kind of why that story map was created, is to show engineers, to show developers, and kind of incentivize them in a way that you can do this and it's good and it's an amenity. People, would enjoy being around these beautiful landscapes because they can be more beautiful. And residents can incorporate these things too. All the, from rain barrels to bioswales to rain gardens to having native vegetation to, even having permeable pavement, where you're at. I mean, it would be expensive, to tear up the concrete that you have and put it down, but, maybe, if you're building a new house or something like that, you can incorporate those things. So.
Is it more or less expensive for new construction? Do you have a feel for that?
Is permeable concrete, or are these different stormwater BMPs expensive for new construction?
Compared to just laying a blanket of concrete.
No, because concrete's going to be more expensive than, let's say, permeable pavers. And again, like I mentioned, you don't have to do permeable concrete in the whole parking lot. Maybe you just do it in a part of the parking lot, and maybe you add curb cuts in that parking lot that goes into a bioswale. So the thing is that there's already mandated landscape architects that these developers contract out. They have to have plants, they have to have trees and parking lots and stuff like that. So the idea is, well, when you do this landscape, why don't you turn it into what some people might feel like to refer to as a rainscape? Create landscape that plans for the use and movement and reuse of water. So within a medium, instead of just having, a curb with a tree popping out of the middle of it, why don't you have curb cuts there and have plants there that go into a bioswale and then go into a gutter? So, they're already at that development stage is really when you really should be doing these things, because it would be a lot cheaper than to go back and do it again. That's not the case with every BMP, right? I think switching from non-native landscape to native landscape will probably save you money in the long run. And at least will be definitely more beneficial and won't cost that much. But yeah, those are some of the thoughts I have about that.
Great, thank you.
Is permeable concrete reinforced with steel rebar?
I believe it is, yeah. And that's a great question.
Looks like it would crumble under heavy weights.
Yeah, especially in a parking lot setting, it would definitely need to be. And there's definitely an amount of maintenance. So every so often, maybe you would take a pressure washer to it and you would, clean it off because it's porous. So it can collect, debris, silt and those sorts of things. So you'll want to clean it and maintain it. But, that's the cost for being environmentally friendly sometimes.
I've never seen it anywhere. Is it very widely used?
That's the thing. No, it's not. It's not widely used, but it exists. A lot of contractors, I recently was involved with just a project where people were laying concrete, and I asked them if they've ever heard about it and if they did it, and they've never heard about it and they've never done it. So I think the goal of this kind of education and outreach is to, tout the benefits of it and to spread the awareness that these things exist so it can be used more often.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions for Jace before we close down shop tonight? This is your last chance. No?
Thanks, Jace. I really learned about the permeable paving today. I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah,
And thanks for the information. Appreciate that.
you're welcome.
A lot of permeable pavers are around. I've seen that a lot of different places. You do get weeds growing up in the holes, but I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and the permeable pavers, yeah, because you can just mow over it.
Or the cars will keep that growth down.
Yeah, yeah, in parking lots.
Okay, well, this is it. Last call for questions. Hearing none, we're going to thank our speaker, Jace Proctor, for a nice presentation. And we're going to shut this meeting down and adjourn. So now I have to find out if John, is John Lingenfelter present? He went to take a pill earlier. He may be conked out. Okay, Lynn, are you present? I have a backup co-host, my wife, and I guess she's.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. We're ready to close the meeting, and John is not here. So can you close the meeting?
Yeah, I can shut you down.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye,
for coming.
everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Jace, good program.
Thank you.